how your husband treats the dog like a princess, so
A prince.
spoiled, prince, then, yup, spoiling it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what I, definitely a big, find out.
Good evening. I'd like to call this operations work group, school board meeting to order for Monday, May 13th, 2024. Before we get to public comments, I just want to make an announcement regarding student senate campaigns and the candidates. Looking ahead to our student spring election for the student representative to the Board of Education and student senate president positions for the 25-24 or for the 24th school year. The field of candidates is now confirmed. So running unopposed for student representative to the Board of Education is Megan Fernando, a current junior at West High School. And then running for Senate, student senate. President is Claire Lee, a current freshman at West High School. Gabriel Uribe, a current sophomore at West High School, and Zun He, a current sophomore at West High School. So the campaigns may now begin, and the candidates will have an online thing on the MMSD Student Senate website. The student spring primary election will take place via forms on Google for all high school students on May 21st through May the 24th. More specific details regarding the election will come. All right, now moving on to public input. We've got two written statements, both in favor of scratch cooking. And I believe we have two in-person speakers and one online.
One in person, one online.
Got it. Thank
We have a preference. When you want first?
Let's do online first.
Okay, online would be David O'Keefe.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is David O'Keefe. I'm a substitute teacher at Sandburg Elementary School. I'm talking today about free school lunch and kind of the community-wide push for that, and want to speak in support of free school lunches. Of course, the student walkout the other day led by Voces and Latinx high school student unions, school lunch was one of those. But more importantly, I think it's just so important that we guarantee access to free and healthy breakfast and lunch for every single student. And there's a lot of benefits of a universal system. Obviously, we know food insecurity is at an all-time high. Students and families are struggling with a lot of challenges, and being able to guarantee and provide a meal every day, no questions asked, it makes a big difference for those people immediately. The current school meal debt is over $214,000, and it continues to climb. And next week, a community campaign of a few different organizations will be launching a campaign to pay off that current debt of $214,000. Because when families can't pay that debt and the food and nutrition department has to settle that debt, it comes out of the same pot of money that would otherwise go to feed kids healthier meals. And so when we think about scratch cooking, for example, the scratch cooking equipment at Nuestra Mundo cost about $50,000. The school meal debt is over 4 times that, at over $200,000. And so we're stepping up as a community to try and fundraise that money so this nutrition program doesn't have to pay it out. In that regard, we're also asking the school district to step up and fund school lunches moving forward. There's a couple different options for that, and I think obviously want to hear from the school district and how to implement that, because obviously it's a challenge. But first and foremost, it would look like providing $2 million in the next budget to close the school lunch gap, and to close that gap and fund lunches for every single family, no questions asked. And then, of course, from there, it's about converting to a more stable universal school meal funding system going forward. The community eligibility provision schools, of which there are 16 currently in the district, the applications for those close on June 30th. So I'm asking on the school board and school district to see if there's a few more schools that make sense to apply. Even if they don't break even, they might lose money less than what it looks like to fund school meals through an alternative system. And then the final thing I want to speak in favor today is increase in equipment and staff, especially if referendums do pass in November. We know from schools that do switch to a universal school funding model that meal participation can increase 30 to 40%, which is great. That's exactly what we want to see. It also means we have to invest and prepare for that ahead of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our in-person speaker is E.G. Nadeau. If you want to come up to the computer over here, and then we will start in 3 minutes when you're ready. The one that's sitting.
Right here. Oh.
Yeah.
You
I moved it. Sorry about that.
tricking me. Well, can you see me? Yep. Right. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak related to the issue of the long-range facilities plan. Just as an intro, I'm a grandfather of a kid at Lowell School right now, and two of my kids went to Sky and elsewhere in the system too. But I'm also speaking on behalf of an informal group called the 100% Clean MMSD group. Members of our group have spoken here before. And there are 4 things that I want to address in my very brief presentation. These are recommendations that our group has made to you and to the school board as a whole, who are new principal. The first one is that we hire an MMSD energy manager in 2024. I know that we are planning on hiring a manager. I don't know when, but I urge that it be very soon because there's urgency around being ready for the Inflation Reduction Act. Schools a lot of money if they apply for it. So that's one of our recommendations. Second one is that we create an MMSD Sustainability Advisory Committee. And I think we sort of have already. In fact, we have 2 of them, one that's student-based and one that's community-based. I don't know if they're calling them Sustainability Advisory Committees or not, but they have been meeting. So it looks like you folks are already dealing with that issue. Third recommendation is that we commit to installing heat, HVAC, what does that stand for? Heat and ventilation and air conditioning systems that minimize carbon emissions over the long run. And the main feature of that recommendation is that we move away from natural gas. All of you realize this, a fossil fuel, toward clean energy sources of energy for the HVAC system in our schools. That was, by the way, that was not done with 4 high schools, even though the high schools had their HVAC systems retrofitted after the resolution was passed to not do things like that. Okay, the 4th recommendation is that we leverage technologies and incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act to the greatest extent possible. And I'm just going to read this whole little statement. In planning for all district facilities. Oh, I'm over time. Okay. Can I finish the sentence?
Yeah.
Okay. In planning for all district facilities, take maximum advantage of the various technologies such as ground source heat pumps, which is geothermal heating, and solar voltaics that are provided under the Inflation Reduction Act. And remember that the provisions under the Act expire on December 31st, 2032. So we need to take advantage of that money as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, on to item number 3, the approval of minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the operations meeting dated April 8th, 2024.
Second.
Second, Board Chair Nichols. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay. All right, we have, sorry, 1, 2, 5 items on the docket tonight. We're first gonna dive into the long-range facilities plan, and I believe that is Dr. Herding and Bob Soldner presenting to us. Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Ready to go? Am I gonna be starting it? Yeah. All right, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to start with the long-range facility plan on slide 6. Okay. So last week, you heard from us with a very brief presentation and an initial look at the long-range facility plan. As a reminder, it is board policy 1535 that we bring that long-range facility plan to y'all to review. The policy states that the district shall develop a long-range facility plan approved by the board, and it shall be reviewed by the board at a minimum of every 3 years. And it's going to include priorities associated with district buildings and facilities to ensure the efficient use of existing space. It will also be informed by analysis of attendance areas, building assessments, existing classroom space, growth projection, instructional design needs, and community input, which you've heard bits and pieces of for the last several months. We can go to the next slide. So timeline reminders. So today we'll welcome some of to hear what you thought about that initial facility plan. And then next week at our regular board meeting, we will ask the board to recommend to accept the long-range facility plan. And then we are also going to be at the next board meeting asking for the board to have consideration of our long-term capital improvement fund, 2026. You'll hear more today. And then creating that long-term capital improvement trust fund and improving a 10-year capital plan. Next slide. My favorite slide, the timeline. So this is very similar to the timeline that y'all saw last week. Just a reminder, we started our community engagement phase 2 sessions last week. So those began on Tuesday of last week. And we will be holding another one tomorrow. Tomorrow will be at La Follette, I believe. We have started our second community survey that is right now out in the public to get feedback, and that we also share that survey with anyone who comes to the community engagement sessions as well. Again, in June, we are going to be asking for the board to decide if we're going to be going to referendum and voting on those questions, with the latest of that actually being August if needed. And that will be heading us then towards that November 2024 ballot, where we potentially may have a referendum question on operations and a referendum question on facilities. And I'll hand it over to Bob.
All right, thanks, Jen. So as a recap for the long range facilities plan, ultimately there were 6 recommendations contained within the long range facilities plan. The first was to develop a long-term capital improvement plan for the next 20 years. Conduct an after-action review to gather feedback and lessons learned from referendum 2020. So the projects and processes that we went through as we have been told, the referendum 2020 projects will be finishing up summer of 2024. The recommendation to establish a long-term capital improvement trust fund. Fund 46, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then really as part of the long-range facilities plan, I just want to remind the board, we're under contract with Vanderwall to do a more detailed long-term enrollment projection. That information should be coming towards the end of the summer. That's a critical piece of our long-range facility planning. So that we're looking forward to that. In addition, we're recommending that the district establish a district-wide superintendent's advisory group to continue our long-range facilities analysis. We are in this for the long haul. We're gonna need to continue to work month to month, year to year, as we move into the next couple of decades, really, in terms of the needs of our facilities and the timelines that we can attend to those facilities. And then finally, consider a referendum in the fall of 2024, focusing on updating the current list of 14 priority schools. Those are next listed. Just a little on the next slide, Jesse. These are the 14 schools that were included in the long-range facilities plan. The focus is continuing our work on Shabazz High School and Sherman Middle School in terms of the first priority coming up. In 2020, the board talked about the need to work on the comprehensive high schools, including Capitol High, the alternative would be our second alternative school we'd be focusing on. But the board foreshadowed at the time to focus next on our middle schools, other high needs or critical needs schools. And so these 14, this list of 14 schools, 6 of those are combined middle school, elementary combination sites that we recommend the focus for as we look towards that next recommended referendum. Okay, this next slide is a perfect reminder, not that I need much of a reminder, that we do things as a team and that we collaborate, and that Lisa and TJ and others on the work, probably everybody on the work said to me, you keep throwing all these terms up, you can't keep track of them. So can you work on developing a visual to help this? And I said, I'll be happy to ask Amy and the communications team to do just that, because here's the list, here's the terms, here's the definitions. So this is a little bit of graphic to help us kind of go and put some of the conversations of, and what I'm trying to put in context is the next part of what I want to talk about is creation of a capital long-term capital improvement plan. And so this is kind of showing a pathway of where the district has been and where we are at and where we are going, and then including the context of it all. So back in 2008, the board created a capital expansion fund called Fund 41. We have actually levied $88 million 2008 in Fund 41. And that's a fund that's restricted for financing current and future capital expenditures. And again, it's a tool to finance capital improvements and the work that we've done. Taken quite a bit of advantage of that tool, and it's worked very well for the district to focus our resources on facilities operations upkeep. The long-range facilities plan is defined in board policy, as Jen told us, to be updated every 3 years. And that's kind of the context. That's the anchor amongst how we choose to finance the projects that are identified, not only in the long-range facilities plan, but as needs change in between. And then finally, the recommendation of Fund 46, the long-term capital improvement plan. And so there's 2 terms that are going to be that I'm going to talk about now within Fund 46. There's a long-term capital improvement plan that we're recommending be developed that's over 20. That's a much more detailed, involved long-term capital improvement plan. That'll be our end. In a short time, we'd like the board to consider creating Fund 46. The state law requires a 10-year minimum long-term capital improvement plan to go along with that Fund 46, the long-term capital improvement trust fund. And so a little bit on Fund 46. Fund 46 is a tool that's been around for a while. It has some unique characteristics. On the highest level, it allows the board to create a tool that's sole purpose is to implement a long-term capital improvement plan. And in terms of our next steps, our facility condition report from last fall, the submission of the current long-range facilities plan, it seems a good opportunity for the board to create a Fund 46 to continue to provide the district options to look at ways to fund facilities. This fund is unique in a couple of ways, and the first and most important uniqueness is once it's created, it has to sit 5 years without any ability to use the fund to finance long-term capital improvements. And so a clock ticks. You create it, it sits for 5 years, and after the 1 day in 5 years, you're able to take money out if you need it to implement existing at that time, long-term capital improvement plan. That's very unique. So that's why the request is here to you today as part of that long-range facilities plan. The second piece is that the fund treats costs differently in terms of shared costs. It actually creates a cost under the state definition of an expenditure when money is deposited into the fund. That's a very unique accounting term, but it's meant to allow districts to really manage their shared costs to get additional aid. Now, for Madison, that's not really the reason why we would be looking at a Fund 46, because we are in a different spot in the formula. It's called negative aid. But the reason I really would like us to create that Fund 46 is we know school finance is changing, and we know a simple matter of state law was from negatively aided to a hold harmless situation in terms of our factors or any other law. And this fund requires a 5-year wait period. And so that's why the recommendation is there. And it was really a tool that we really started looking at when we were exploring both that traditional debt referendum like we did back in 2020 and that 20-year facility and ops referendum question that we were considering. But I still think it's our recommendation, and I think it's my opinion, a good decision to create that Fund 46 to have it for the future. Okay. Put it up for questions now in terms of the long-range facilities plan. Mike and Jen and I can answer questions. And then just the questions of, do you want us to continue to move forward with the draft resolution that we have to create a Fund 46 and go into more detail if you want to the 10 capital improvement plan that is along with this plan. But I won't go into the 10-year capital improvement plan if there's a general consensus, not really interested in that with Fund 46. But there is a plan also in materials. I can
Board Member Nichols.
Thanks. Okay, so just, Bob, I know you just explained this, but I want to see if we can explain it again.
Sure.
Because right now we have a capital expansion fund 41. And you're proposing that we start a new fund, Fund 46, also with a focus on capital improvements. But you're referencing that one as a long-term capital improvement fund, where the initial money that goes in, you can't touch for 5 years. So can you explain? I could see that as like really helping us build money towards kind of the longer term facility improvements that we need, especially based on our conditions report. But how does that work with the Fund 41 that we currently have?
Sure. Very good question. So first, let me, because I think let me say it clearly, the Fund 46, I think it'll help you put a reason why it's a different kind of financing tool.
Okay.
Fund 46, once the board moves money into a Fund 46, it can never be used for anything else. It can never come back out of Fund 46 unless it's for an approved expenditure in the capital improvement. So it's a way for the board to say, move forward, on a referendum, we ask for X, We want a place that is gonna hold this money in reserve only to work on a long-term capital improvement plan.
Okay,
So it's really a holding place for the board to put money. Now, are there other ways to hold money? Yes, there are. You can designate fund balance in Fund 10, but Fund 46 is a specific trust fund that once the money goes in, you cannot use it for anything. The board could not pull it back out for anything else other than an expenditure in the long-term capital.
okay,
Fund 41.
thank you.
Fund 41 is a tool that works very well for the district compared to Fund 46, really because of how we are in the state's formula in terms of shared costs and calculation of equalization. Fund 41, in recent history, the board has been levying $5 million a year specifically for facility improvement. You have been levying that in Fund 41. Fund 41 allows you to amortize costs over the length of the money you're depositing in Fund 41. So we can level off our costs over the length of the time we're depositing in Fund 41, which has the effect of smoothing and shrinking our shared costs, which is optimal in our position because we are in a position in the formula where when we spend one more dollar on costs, we're actually penalized 57 cents on that dollar next year.
Mm.
So if we spend a dollar more than what we're spending compared to this year, we have to make up for revenue of $1.57. In other words, our aid is reduced. We make that up on the property tax. Remember how I shared with you where 10% state aided and 90% property tax funded school district?
Yeah.
That's one reason why, because of where we are in school.
Mhm.
And so Fund 41 is totally makes complete financial and logical sense to take and maximize our monies since 2008 to put money into our facilities in the most cost-effective way. It's an excellent tool. And I want to continue to utilize. Fund.
Okay, so you wanna maintain Fund 41.
Yes, absolutely. It's our primary vehicle for designating operations and maintenance.
Okay, so for example, any of the larger cost investments that we've made thus far that haven't been the 2020 referendum tied to that. Have we pulled from Fund 41
Yes,
to do some of that?
we've done all kinds of projects with Fund 41.
Okay,
Combination of Fund 41 and Fund 10 that we use to fund actual projects,
okay,
roofs, windows. We fund staff in part with 10 and 41 and the continued work on operations, maintenance and facilities.
Okay.
It's a critical piece of how we finance our ops and maintenance and I recommend we continue to go at a minimum 5 million.
okay. Can I just ask for Fund 46, how would we envision getting money into that fund?
Couple of ways.
Okay,
The really the only way into that fund is you levy in Fund 10, our property taxes, or you receive state aids and we transfer money in from our Fund 10 into Fund 46.
okay. Okay. I do have a couple of comments about the long range facility plan, but is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanna thank you all again for all of the work that was put into the report. So one of the things that, and this isn't specifically related to the recommendations yet, I just wanna get clear on a couple things. So on page 17, where it references the facility conditions report. I'm letting get to the page. The opening paragraph talks about the 2023 facility conditions report. And that you all had outlined the costs to achieve the goals outlined in the Board of Education's 2019 renewable energy goal. And we know that we just updated that resolution, which you talk about under section 5 in the focus on sustainability. I guess what I'm wondering is this. So would this facility conditions report have to be updated again based on the newer passing of the resolution? Or, you know, I mean, in an overall long-range facility plan? Or do you think that the state of the facilities that you all outlined and the costs, I mean, were those more like a snapshot in time anyway, because costs could go up or change?
Yeah. So from my perspective, the facility condition report and in terms of the isolating sustainability, the types of projects that we would implement would achieve both goals the board had. Right. It is about sustainability. It is about reducing carbon footprints. And it's really the new goal compared to the old goal is how we measured achieving that. And zero greenhouse gas emissions is really the standard, not only of the industry, but others in terms of how we evaluate. So you're achieving both the original 2019 resolution and the current one if you install geothermal or solar panels or put an LED light to use less energy, right? So the facility condition report, at this time, I don't think it needs to be updated, right? It's a good indication, building by building, of what it would take to renovate or improve that building. What the facility condition report doesn't do is, would it be a good investment to renovate this or build absolutely brand new?
Yeah.
But it does address the component of sustainability. So it does not have to be updated based on the resolution.
Okay, great. Then I wonder, given that answer, if your sentence should read along with the cost to achieve the goals outlined in the Board of Education's 2024 renewable energy goal. Because we just updated it, and if you think that it can be met, it seems like that would be more current than still referencing the 2019 one.
Sure, the sentence reference, the facility condition report, when it was created, we had the original resolution. So that was the resolution that was used, and we didn't contemplate, obviously, the changing of the resolution at the time. So
Okay.
You want us to clarify that facility condition report is still applicable.
Yeah, so maybe if you
Yeah.
could add a
Yeah.
sentence
Yeah, I
that since
Yeah.
the time of the condition
Yeah.
report, the board has updated their language.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know. Okay. Then in the next section, Bob, on section 5 and Dr. Harding, coming back to the focus on sustainability, I appreciate that you do have in the second paragraph that in April of 2024, the MMSD Board of Education adopted revised language from this resolution to focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and align with industry best practices. At the end of the last paragraph, where you've talked about what the city is doing and what Madison Gas and Electric and Alliant Energy are doing, the last sentence says, as such, MMSD sustainability goals are impacted and dependent on these utility providers. So we knew from all of your presentations, kind of the ecosystem that we're situated in terms of the utility providers. So I understand the dependent on or interdependent on our utility providers. But when you say, as such, MMSD sustainability goals are impacted, what exactly is that part of the sentence stating?
I'll let other folks add to what I'm gonna share. When we were working on this, it's how we are gonna invest our limited monies for facilities is contingent on if the utilities are on the same timeline as ours in terms of our goal 2040. So when I say they're impacted independent by it, it's the example I kind of think of when we're talking about this, should we invest millions of dollars in solar panel, a solar field today? Or should we invest in more HVAC mechanical system that's not natural gas but electric if we can't afford geothermal? To me, because the utilities are already, we're on the same timeline for them. We're better to invest our monies on upgrading our HVAC mechanicals and installing geothermal than say building a separate solar panel field, because utilities are already gonna be working on renewable energy sources. So it's better to invest our limited monies in things that we control more and are more in line with the goals of the industry. So we're doing stuff that's gonna reduce our utility consumption, and the utility companies are producing energy that's sustainable, right? So we're doing it in parallel, but we're dependent. Like if all of a sudden they would back off, we would have to not only reduce our use of utilities, but we'd have to be focusing on other strategies, right? Like we had
Yeah.
talked about buying credits or investing more in solar fields,
Yeah.
farms.
So to me, I feel like some of what you said. A stronger sentence, in my opinion, would be that MMSD is kind of well poised to be operating kind of parallel efforts.
That makes sense.
Because and that we, we realize our dependence and kind of on with our utility providers. Something that sounds a little bit more proactive, because right now it reads as though, I don't know. Like
Yeah.
maybe we wouldn't
No,
meet the goal.
I think good.
Okay. And then the last thing that I had noticed, and it might just be because I didn't click on one of the hyperlinks, so if I did not, just let me know. Under the page 20, the recent sustainability accomplishments. Do we provide more of the specificity of the accomplishments that we have? Is that one of the hyperlinks? Because right now it's kind of like we do kind of bulleted highlights. And I actually think the detail of like all that we have done is important.
Appendix A of the report.
Appendix.
So that would be on page 25, starting on page 25.
We've made an attempt to try to highlight by year the projects that were sustainability efforts.
Okay. Great. Thank you. As far as the recommendations, and then stay done, I'm sorry, I'll be done in just a moment. The recommendations, okay, what page are those?
Page 23.
All right, thank you.
Section 6.
Yes. I can completely see how we need to get into a long-term capital improvement plan and really like looking out. So I understand that. You've explained the Fund 46, so 1 and 3 makes sense to me. The consider a referendum in fall 24 makes sense to me. Review kind of detailed long-term enrollment projections. You had just explained in your opening tonight that a more comprehensive projection will be coming, and a district-wide superintendent's advisory group makes sense to me. The one recommendation around conducting an after-action review, I do think it's a great idea for there to be kind of a thoughtful look back at what have we learned from the 2020 referendum projects and processes. Although that seems more like an internal way of working. And so I'm not exactly sure like the strength of that being a more formal recommendation. The other ones seem more action that the board either can take to support the work of long-range facility and or, you know, the superintendent and kind of key staff, but that one. I think it's necessary. I'm just trying to figure out, is it a recommendation?
Well, in coming up with that, we just felt it was important the public acknowledge that we have spent, what, 317 million, or actually over that, on all of these facilities. So what did we learn? We want to be real transparent about, we want to go back and see what went well and what should we do different? And we're talking about the end users of the facility. We're talking about our work with Findorf. We're talking our work with Huffman and Keel, all of those independent, so as to inform if we go to referendum the next time. So I think I understand where it's internal, but we want to be very transparent about making sure that we're going back and reviewing what we've done, so to fine tune it. So I think that's the thinking that
Okay,
when we included it.
well, I appreciate that. So when you say it's a public acknowledgement that we're going to pause long enough to do some learning and to capture that, is that going to be shared publicly or is that an internal process?
I don't think there would be, I think it'd be fine to share that publicly. Like, we're very open, like, what did we learn? What can we do better?
Okay,
What didn't work out quite as well as we thought?
okay,
Because in I think I'll leave it at that. I think that there would be no reason not to share it. Like, I'm sure that there'll be some good learning as we go back and review it.
yeah, I'm just asking because I'm trying to figure out if there's something that would be public facing and something that Board of Education members in the future we could reference, as we're thinking about
Yeah.
long-term investments in our facilities. So thank you for clarifying.
Well, and I think we talked too, didn't we, about going back and asking some staff and community members about simply some of the logistics that
Yes, I
happen during
remember.
facilities, like, you know, were kids expected to, you know, have a traffic pattern this way? How did that, you know, parents may have said, gosh, you know, loading and unloading zones were impacted this way. We think it could have been better that way. So I think, yeah, I think the way we talked about it was the end users, like you said, probably have some logistical lessons that they have actually taken part in that we don't know about. So what have we not heard? I think, and I do think there'd be an opportunity for some public sharing that.
And kind of did the use of the spaces we envisioned come to fruition, or if not, why not?
Okay,
We can take a look at that language and see if there's something we can do to make that piece come out more boldly in that section too.
I'm actually excited.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Board Member Pearson, then Board Member Vandermeulen.
Good evening, everyone. Just a quick question, Bob, for you about Fund 46. I guess what is the benefit for us if we were to approve that fund being created? And what would be the benefit of us doing that?
I think there's a couple of benefits for us doing it. I think it's a commitment by the board that you're looking long-term, and you know we need to be looking long-term. I think based on the facility condition report that we talked about last fall, clearly lays out a significant facility needs in terms of the length of our facilities, how much we can manage, how much the private sector can manage. We're literally talking about a 20 to 25 year based on current factors that we know, how many projects we can manage and afford. To accomplish all what we need to do with our facilities over the longer term. I think that alone is a good reason. And the other one is, I really want us to be better prepared for the future of the ever-changing school finance landscape, right? This might become a tool we want to be able to have 6 years from now. And if we don't act now and at least create it under current law, we're not gonna have it available to us in the future when we potentially might need it. So I think it's a smart move now, and there's not a lot of downsides to creating it now. There's, in my mind, more upsides than down. more benefits than costs.
Thank you for that answer. Also too, so from my understanding, okay, so the 5 years, is there a minimum amount that we have to put into it for those 5 years? Or is it that we put, for instance, like say it's like 100,000 is a minimum. We have to hold it there for 5 years, that 100,000, but if we're adding funds to it, does that mean that we still have to wait for those funds for 5 years? So like after 2 years, we add some funds. Does a 5 year start for those new funds? I guess I'm just a little confused of just how that kind of just works completely.
Yeah,
And what the
yeah, those are very good questions. My recommendation, we would put a very nominal amount, given where we are in the equalization aid formula. We would not want to do much more than what would be minimally required. If we go forward with this, we are literally required to create a separate account to reflect the trust fund. Districts around the state that have created this, you know, they'll deposit as much as little as $100, right? A very nominal amount just to get it, have it established and have it go 5 years. After the 5 years happen, we can put money in and take money out every other day, right? There's no limitation. The fund is created and it can be used. The only limitation under current law is it must be used for a project that's been outlined in the 10-year, well, the minimum of the 10-year capital plan. By then, we should have the 20-year capital plan. We will, if you agree with the recommendation.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, thank you. I can make this real easy. I am not for Fund 46. I think we have enough funds. What I'm concerned about isn't just the health of our buildings. The most important thing to me is the health of our staff and the health of our workers and the health of everyone that works at MMSD. And I think that needs to be priority. I realize they're two separate things, but I can't look that far in the future when we can't focus even 4 years in the future on what we pay our staff. I just can't. That's me. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means that's where my goals and priorities lie. I really agree though with what Michelle said on the sustainability goals. I really like your language changes. I think it made it a lot clearer and understanding, and I think we need to include the 2024 referendum. This board did a lot of work with that, and we should be proud of that. Talia did a lot of work on that, and we need to be proud of that, and it needs to reflect that. That's a major part of it. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any remaining board member questions? Okay, I think team is looking to get our thoughts on where we're at with the Fund 46. So please communicate any outstanding thoughts or questions you may have related to that in the coming weeks before the final board meeting in May. Next week. Yep, next week. And so we already covered this, right then?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so moving right along to item 6, the proposed budget development, and item 7, the budget amendment process and timeline.
Okay, so before we move off, I didn't go through the detail, which is also in your attachments, the 10-year capital improvement plan. It just goes with the Fund 46 resolution. And I'll tell you, the first 14 schools on that 10-year capital improvement plan, with estimates of when they can be attended to, are the first 14 schools, the long-range facilities plan.
Yep.
Then they follow the other priority schools that we think do that. So that's the order of the 10-year capital plan. I don't have the details.
That's just sort of what you have to do for
Yeah.
that fund.
You have to have a resolution creating Fund 46, and you have to approve the minimum 10-year long-term capital plan. And again, can't stress enough that capital improvement plan is required for Fund 46. That's amendable, can be changed as often or as little as the board wants.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, so the budget development and the budget timeline, we are into it. But first, let me say, this is an exciting time for us, right? We've got the proposed budget in terms of the abbreviated budget book. And I want to stress when we get into this, at this point in the process, our budget for 24-25 is a living, breathing document. And I can only guarantee you one thing, it's gonna change, right? Because there are significant factors we don't know about in terms of equalization aid, in terms of the end of the year condition statements of actual expenditures on June 30th of 2024. It'll take us some time, 30+ days, to really close out our books. So my point is, there's a lot of moving pieces, but this is the budget, the best that we have now in terms of the proposed budget. We want to all look at it. We'll talk about the budget amendment process. So the timeline is proposed budgets here. We'll want to talk about the specifics as we move through this operations work group. We'll collect some budget amendments now. We can make changes for the June 10th operations work group in terms of recommendations to modify that 24-25 proposed budget, with the ultimate goal of the board approving in the June board meeting the preliminary budget. And then I will tell you, when you approve that preliminary budget, the only thing I'll guarantee you is that will change, because the fact that will continue to change that we need to get to that final approved budget in the fall, right? So this is a months-long process. Even though we've already been months into it, it'll continue to evolve and change. Okay, so for today, I want to give some more information regarding the budget development. We're going to cover the state imposed revenue limits. Jennifer and her team have been working a lot on providing more information on health and dental insurance and updates. I want to talk about the proposed budget as being the option 2 that we've been talking about. An option 1 and an option 2 is what we're ultimately going to need approved in the fall. Okay. Next slide, Jesse. And then we want to talk touch a little bit on the budget amendment process. Okay, the next 2 slides are really just an overview of how we've tried to put together a budget. And I come away with the guiding principles of the board, and we're trying to allocate obviously limited resources to talk about the goals in our strategic framework, to keep the focus on early literacy and early learning in terms of 4-year-old kindergarten. We continue to try to find the data to support changes in our operations to better close the opportunity gaps that exist. We're continuing to try to take a multi-year long-term look at the condition that state imposed revenue limits put on our finances. And so we had several goals that I think we continue to address. And again, the budget is open and we can continue to refine the areas in terms of what the budget is talking about today. So I want to go to the first major assumption for our budget on the next slide, Jesse. As we have been talking about, much like we talked about our 24-25 allocation, right? We held constant the allocation staffing in 23-24. We made some decisions that were different to have more stability and continuity of operations for scholars and students and our staff in terms of the school allocations. And so the budget that is before you assumes that we will maintain our enrollments that we had this year in 23-24. And this slide is just a recognition of what those numbers were, most recently updated by us and used by the state of Wisconsin. So this would really continue our leveling, actually a slight increase, but a leveling off from what UW Applied Pops has us in terms of a declining enrollment by anywhere from 400 to 500 students a year. I've yet to hear a really good explanation of why we leveled off when we did. And so our January, second Friday, January count was even a little bit higher than our third Friday, September count. So we are assuming a no FTE change. Okay. So with a no FTE change and with the ending of our prior approved operating dollars in 23-24, we're leveling off a little bit more in terms of our enrollment projections. And that is obviously a result of a couple of things. Holding the student count flat and not declining. It keeps our base a little bit more whole in terms of max revenue, blue part of the chart as we look forward. I do want to say that with the 325 per student revenue limit member increase, it still only results in a 1.7% increase in terms of our ongoing revenues, right? And so CPI this year is 4.12%. So under revenue limits, we are still continuing to be constrained in terms of a sustainable revenue. Last year, costs went up CPI 8%, our revenue limit only went up 2%. And so the difference between the next slide, Jesse, the difference between this year of that 8% CPI and the less than 2% we got on the revenue limit was that $21 million gap. The similar gap, based on the estimates that we know today for revenue limits, it adds another about $9.5 million. So $21 million this year, we're going to be starting $9.5 million down from revenue. If our revenues increase at the rate of CPI versus what the state is allowing us to increase on a per basis, which is at 325 per member. So the point being, revenue limits aren't getting any changing in terms of matching CPI in terms of revenue growth as our costs are. Now, clearly they can't change. The legislature hasn't voted to change the law, and it's the law that existed last year. But it's a good reminder of the update of what we're looking at. Okay. Again, we've been talking about our world. The need that we're going to have to do in our April fall budget is we will eventually officially lay out two budgets to be approved. One budget that I believe reflects your needs and the community's needs to meet our scholars, our students, and our staff's needs, which really reflects additional revenues being provided by the voters in November. Or option two, which is the proposed budget before you, that is a budget that does less than what you want, but is a budget that I believe we can manage without additional new revenues approved by the voters in the fall. It will take a substantial influx investment of our one-time revenues, primarily funded from the fund balance, and then other one-time savings from vacancies and interest monies and other revenues that are one-time and have not been budgeted for use in 23-24. Thanks for getting that, TJ. Okay, so this is the two budget options with some refinements and some shiftings as things have become known, and the proposed budget is before you. Well, I've mixed a couple of things in this slide to continue in the same framework, fundamentally of what this 24-25 budget is now, option 2 and option 1. And so our proposed Fund 10 expenditures are on the top line, and that's to give context to the big areas of the budget that are really significant additions from the 23-24 school year. And so quickly and go down the list. We've talked about the ESSER positions, the 111 that we moved to Fund 10 at 12.4 million. Jennifer's going to talk more about the $11.7 million health insurance increase. We talked about steps and lanes being in this option 2 at $6.2 million. It's part of the proposed budget. And then the equity projects we've talked about that I'll highlight a little bit later for 13. You'll see in the next slides kind of where we are going in terms of what that means for our bottom line. So you've seen this slide before. This is the history. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's where we are. And let me stress here probably a couple of points. I want to stress that the 23-24 fall budget is just that. It was an approved budget that we knew in the fall. We projected at that time that we would end the year needing 12.4 in one-time dollars to meet our budgeted expenditures, right? We know, as it is every year, our actual expenditures are going to come under, that is, be less than our budgeted expenditures. But that's one of the big moving pieces that we're going to look at. Jennifer's team and my team are working now, and we will have a number. Tell you more at the June operations work group how confident I am with that number. But we are working on a really hard number, matching a couple of our data points on how much we believe we're going to have in terms of the vacancy, the vacant positions, how long they are vacant, and what we believe we're going to be actually spending compared to budget expenditures. That is one of those huge pieces that's going to move in terms of our bottom line of what I believe we can afford and not afford in terms of if we do not get additional revenues in the fall, can we make it through the 24-25 school year, right? A huge piece of that is that ending funding. Okay, next slide. This is where I'll repeat, it's an exciting time, but there's a lot of red on this slide. And what that red means is that we have revenues, ongoing revenues that are sufficiently less than our ongoing expenditures. And so on this slide, I carried over the fall 23-24 budget. I put in the option 2 for the proposed budget, which is what we already talked about, and then the chain, right? So starting on the top, we're $30 million short in ongoing revenues to meet our ongoing expenditures. And what that means in terms of an ending fund balance, if you look at the middle column, that's 44.5, $45 million. The comparable number that we approved in the fall is $12.4 million. Now, again, both of these numbers are going to change. One, as we continue to take a look at other items in the budget you wish to include, and also equally important, where are our revenues in terms of one-time revenues, that difference of budgeted expenditure, actual expenditures, right? But what it is telling us is that we are using one-time revenues to sustain ongoing expenditures, which we cannot do. We cannot do forever, right? But I do believe at this time, I can confidently say, I believe on estimates, right? There's no guarantees here, but based on what we're looking at, based on history, we should have enough one-time revenues to cover that proposed budget 2 and end the year sufficiently within the board's fund balance policy 10 to 15%.
Option 2, you believe we have enough one-time revenues to get through the next year?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Now, a bit of the recap in terms of our projections. Again, revenue limits, where the assumption is there will be no change in enrollments. Reminding everybody, this is the last year of the 2020 operating dollars, the $10 million. Next fall, it's 16. Our revenue growth will continue to be minimal. I talked to you about this per member increase is only 2%, and inflation 4.12% next year in terms of cost increases. And then finally, I need to point this out because right now we're projecting a bit of an increase in our state aids, but under the revenue limit formula, an increase in state aids does not give you more money to spend. It just says you're allowed to tax less. Matter of fact, if you want to maintain your revenues, If the state gives more general equalization aids, we levy less to stay with revenue. So general equalization aids, more aids from the state does not mean we have more money, more revenue to spend. It just means we're not allowed to tax as much under state revenue. And then we'll continue to monitor the per pupil aids, but in the in-between years of the state's biennial budget process, we know what the law is, so we know current law estimates on the categorical aids in terms of per pupil. And then just a recap on the ESSER. I shared with some, we're working on a more fine-tuned chart of the ESSER projects that existed, whether they will continue, and if they continue, what type of funding is going towards them, or in some cases, a comprehensive mental health package that we have is really using separate grants monies and separate aids that were created since ESSER to keep the services. So the next slide is a high level review of ESSER in the end. The bottom line is of the 40.4 million, we're reducing those expenditures by 15.3, and we're adding 61.26 positions in terms of ongoing. The equity projects that are also written up within your budget book are the community schools, the largest, being 61.5 positions and $4.8 million. We Jen and Carletras have provided summaries of grow your own programs that have been created for 24-25, grow your own to associate degree, and also a grow your own that Jen worked in the School of Ed, us now growing our principals and developing principals. Jesse, if you want to go to the perfect, thank you. These are 4K staff increases in terms of the FTE and the dollar amounts, the K1 class size reductions, health services. I talked some about working on the salary compression for student services, and then the creation of a sustainability position, new positions to manage what I believe will be our continued construction projects moving forward, and a building services manager to help us continue to maintain and manage maintenance and operations of the building issues. Okay, I'm going to hit a pause and ask, probably ask questions now a little bit, or should we go to the end? Fully open to how we handle this.
Any questions right now in this pause? Sure, rest of the presentation looks like healthcare vacancies,
It is,
yes.
Policies, I think.
and then policy.
It looks like we should keep going.
Okay. So this slide shows a condensed history of our health insurance policies in 22, 23 and 23, 24. I think there's a duplicate on here. I'm seeing now, but from 21 to 24, there were rate caps that were in place. Last year, those rate caps were not honored by GHC. We transitioned to courts. Courts and Dean have given us their rate increases for this year. It's almost 16% and almost 20%. Inflation has hit healthcare providers particularly hard. They have wage inflation, and they also are seeing the effect of COVID delayed care that has driven up the costs. So you can go to the next slide. This is a review of our current state of enrollment. The majority of our staff uses courts. 63% of our staff takes advantage of our family plan. 37% is on the single plan. Teachers make up the majority of our enrollment in the census pie chart that is on the right side of this slide. And the other, we still have 11% of retirees who are not Medicaid eligible, taking advantage of our health insurance. Next slide is the current
again, these are reviews, so we've seen these before. This is our medical, sort of looks at our medical loss ratio. High for Dean, also high for Quartz. This is similar to what other schools in the Dane County area are seeing. What they want us to see is that for every dollar in premiums, we pay 90% in claims and 10% in administrative costs. And so we're sort of limited because we're over where that target is by the insurance companies on what we can, what their renewal rates come in at. One of the things that we can leverage in future years are changing the deductible, changing co-pays to have already, just if you're going to see your primary care physician versus seeing a specialist, you can design co-pays differently there, looking at another tier on the prescription plan, and then raising the current deductibles. And oh, next slide. Those are on the next. These are our current deductible, or the current deductible is 100 single and 200 for family for an HMO. 3 tiers on the prescriptions. The average, we do have a tiered system where our EAs and some other employee groups are paying 2.5% of the premium. Teachers are paying 6%, professionals 10%, and administrators are 12%. The next slide shows the monthly cost and a comparison to last year. So the monthly difference for a Dean HMO plan is $146. The difference between the Quartz plan on a single is $109. And this is a monthly premium. And again, we have a tiered system that's 2.5%, 6%, 10%, and 12%. The next slide shows
They made
like
me give
what the district is actually paying. For each of these plans, the blue represents the employee contribution and the green is the MMSD contribution. And this is for the employees at the 6% tier, because that's where the majority of our employees are. And this is what makes up the $75.9 million overall. So this is just like, this is one person. And so the amount that the board is contributing to someone's health insurance premiums over the year, it can range up to, it can range up to $30,000, but it averages about $22,000 is what the board is contributing, or the district is paying. So the next slide is our dental insurance renewal. We've seen some of this information before, but I laid it out so that you could see the difference between last year and this year. It's a 4% premium increase. This is the monthly premium, and MMSD employees pay 10%. And the district pays 90% of these premiums. So month to month, it's a $2-ish increase, and per paycheck, it is much smaller than that. Okay. Next slide. This is moving into the vacancy information. So this is a snapshot of positions open as of May 6th for both 2023 and 2024. In 2023, the EA positions did not post until July for the 23-24 school year, which is why there are zeros in those numbers. And also the principal positions were posted in a pool last year, and it was not easy to extract those postings.
So Jennifer, this is a principal in me wanting to summarize.
Yeah.
This. So the EA at assistance and then the BEA SEA line, we used to go through a whole surplus process.
Correct.
And since we kept the workbooks at the same staffing level that they were last year, that's what you see in those numbers. Is that right?
Yes. And it shows, the next slide is this is where the vacancies come from.
Yep.
So, but we can stay on this slide. So vacancies come from
This one right here.
from new allocation, carryover from the previous year. They come from resignations, retirements, contract reductions initiated by teachers, and transfers between schools. So all FTE was left in workbooks for this year. There was no conversions back to the previous year for staff stability. This vacancy number includes the K-1 positions that were included. We retained funding for the SEAs so that they did not have to go into the surplus process. And all unallocated FTE, including the bridging for special, was retained.
And that also would have included the 7.2 new 4K. And does it also include the IDEA allocation added?
Yes.
Because we also added 0.35 of an SEA. It's in the budget on page 8. So that would all be reflected in the listing. So that that the additions that the board made, the investments the board made in staffing to preserve the workbooks, to lower class sizes in K-1. We increased allocation by 1%. You'll see it in the workbook. At elementary, middle, and high, we added 20 more unallocated. And then the 4K allocation. I just want to be sure that we're all just accurate in knowing that that's reflected in this sort of bigger number of postings because of the investment that the board has made to retain and keep teachers. I just want to be sure that our narrative is accurate and that people are hearing us and the board say that we wanted to invest in schools to get them set up right and to get them staffed early on in the school.
Yep, and vacancies are not always the same as postings.
Yeah.
We are working very diligently between the budget planning and the accounting staff and the HR staff about data integrity and data fidelity so that we can reconcile these numbers and then also provide that cost. I think that's
Yeah.
that the board is saying that it's important to us to get that information as well. We also wanted to, I'm ready for the next slide. We talked about this. The next slide shows the staff resignations for the last years, just so that you can see some trend data. This was pulled on May 6th, 2024. It does not include information for retirements and resignations that occurred at the end of the school year, but we are seeing like a downward trend in the number of resignations for all areas, which is good news. It means that the investment that you've made on the salary schedules is keeping people here longer. The next slide is the teacher turnover by race and gender. We wanted to show you this. We typically show you this at the end of the school year. Again, this was a snapshot from last week. So this is point in time information. So this is who we're retaining, using, broken down by race and gender. So going forward for the recruitment and retention, this is a summary of the initiatives happening in the talent acquisition space. We are working to understand the data, including historical baseline and industry comparisons. We're working on a long-term plan, sort of like the long-range facilities plan. I heard that that's something that someone said that in a meeting today, and I'm like, yes, we could align what we're doing with recruitment and staffing to look like what we're doing for the long-range facilities plan so that we have a longer term look rather than just the upcoming school year, even though the upcoming school year is of utmost importance to us to make sure that our scholars have the staff that they need for learning.
And Jennifer, just wanted to add, these are the sort of recruitment and retention staffing plans systematically coming out of the initiatives from HR.
Yes.
This is not the only way we recruit and retain our people, right? It's about working conditions now. It is about you know, the fact that the board invested in staffing up front for hiring, that recruitment and retention actually is a job of more than just HR in the district, but this is sort of the system, the higher level system approach, not granular. There's lots in the granular that I know people want to know about too, but these are the sort of the higher level systems in place, and this continues to have lots of layers underneath it.
Exactly. Thank you. And now we're to the budget amendment timeline, unless we want to pause for questions.
Board Member Nichols?
Okay, my question isn't HR, about the HR piece right now. It is on one of the slides that you presented a little while ago. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Slide 24 gives us the Fund 10 2023-24 change to 24-25.
Mhm.
So what I'm looking at is the fund balance beginning of the year for 24-25, starting at the 78,000,078.3. And the proposed end of the year balance at 33.8. Utilizing 44.5 roughly million. So the first thing I want to ask is, do we think the end of the year fund balance will actually be at 78.3, or do we think that it could potentially, by the time you all kind of reconcile and close out the year, that it could potentially be a little higher or a little lower, like, or is it too soon to say?
I expect, I don't think it's too soon to say.
Okay,
It's too soon to have specific ballot. Right?
okay,
But I do know we have vacancies. We just don't know the vacancies and the actual expenditures being under budget expenditures. We do know our interest earnings higher than budgeted.
okay,
We do know we have some other revenues that we can use in terms of revenues that we know are coming this year that were not budgeted. So these are all revenue streams in the Fund 10 that would increase our fund balance beyond what we knew about in the fall with the budget. These would be those normal factors of, at this point in time, this is a breathing, living document and numbers change. It's always that way. It's just the magnitude of those changes. Some we know and some we don't.
okay,
So I expect that we're going to have a higher ending fund balance than what we approved in the budget last fall.
okay, thank you for that. So then part 2 is, when you look at taking the 44.5 million from the numbers you have right now on the slide, with a projected ending balance at the end of next year at 33.8. Can you remind me again how you are calculating the percent of fund balance that's within our policy? So are you looking at the ending balance and dividing it by the total revenues, or are you taking the ending balance by the total expenditures, or how do we see that we are within policy? Because when I do the math, it doesn't look like we would be within policy.
You're doing your math right. because
Okay.
That calculation is not included in this abbreviated budget.
Okay.
But this summary this is a summary in your abbreviated budget book. Fund 10.
Now I'm on page 24. Is that the same page you're on?
This slide that you're referring to is, wow. This Google slide number 24 is reflective of page 24 of the abbreviated budget book. That wasn't done intentionally, by the way.
24 and 25.
Oh,
Yeah, she was like, what?
have a moment, claim it in.
Coincidence, or is it? No, it is. Okay, so So this slide is my way of netting out revenues and expenditures from this one big page of numbers to get down to what am I supposed to be walking away from this, right? What's
Yeah.
the takeaway? So this is the takeaway slide. That's reflective of the Fund 10
Mm-hmm.
revenues and expenditures. Our fund balance policy, one, is much more complicated and I know it's moving, so we're not gonna put it out because it would be meaningless at this time. But what that actual calculation is the board has a fund balance policy of 10 to 15% of unassigned balance. So we have
Oh,
some of our fund balance
unassigned.
money that's signed and put away for things that we have to contractually pay.
Yeah,
Right, which we work with Natalie and our auditors to make sure what that's gonna be in 24, 25. I don't have those numbers.
mm-hmm,
And then we take that unassigned balance and we divide it by the total Fund 10 expenditures, including the 27 transfer. Or on your slide 24, that $492 million expenditure. That's what we divide into the unassigned balance to get our fund balance percentage.
492.
On the Google slide, we take the unassigned fund balance, divide it by 492 at this time in the proposed budget, 492,746,799.
Oh, of the expense, okay.
Because it's calculated as a percentage of our general fund expenditures.
Mm-hmm,
The general fund expenditures are defined to be the Fund 10 expenditures, which includes the transfer to 27. We have to make 0 to 24, 25. So it's a combination of those two, and that number is 492,746,790.
okay. So if I wanted to do my own math after tonight's meeting,
Wouldn't have enough.
is it possible for me to do the math? So it's not possible yet
Possible.
to see if we're within, okay. So my takeaway then is that when I tried to do the simple math of taking the difference and dividing it up either by the total revenues on page 24 or the total expenditures, either way, it showed us at like 7.5%, which felt like alarming, but then I was like, I don't think you would actually come forward with something that was lower than our policy. So thank you for explaining that you're actually doing math differently.
We will need to do the math differently to calculate the fund balance policy.
Okay.
The math that I've done on the slide is reflective of the proposed
Yes.
budget.
I understand.
Yeah, but it is not the only.
Okay. Thank you.
And so can't do a fund balance addition statement for 24, 25 because we haven't ended 23, 24. It's still the approved budget. It's not the actual budget, which will inform our beginning fund balance in 24, 25. So we need to first close out 23, 24.
Yep.
Figure out what the ending fund balance is, make sure where we're at, and then roll forward. And we know, we absolutely know it's gonna be a different number than the approved number.
Okay.
You don't have all the pieces to do that.
Yep. Thank you.
Any other outstanding questions?
And just, you're absolutely correct, President Nichols. If I believe you're in violation of your fund balance policy, I will notify you.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, that-
And I don't know that budget would be getting passed, but
One of the reasons you said.
I'd be like, Bob, I don't know why you came forward with it.
Cause it would be a recommendation. When it passes, you gotta change your fund balance.
Uh-huh.
A little bit of humor there.
Well, thanks, because I think a lot of us, since the budget book just recently got uploaded, I think I'm not speaking for my colleagues, but what I'm imagining is my colleagues, as well as others who really like to understand our budget and are watching our work groups are also trying to make sense of the numbers. So it's good to know how we're kind of calculating certain things, particularly fund balance when we're projecting to use as much as we are.
Yes, absolutely.
Any questions? Board Member Mosen Feltham?
Thanks. I have a question about the resignation numbers. When you say that it's point in time, that means like, let's take BRS, bilingual resource specialist. Is that in the 21-22 school year at May 6th, one BRS had resigned, or that's the end?
That was for the whole school year.
Okay, and then for 23-24, it's just one.
Correct,
Got it.
yes.
And then for the teacher turnover chart, that's all year for 21-22, all year for 22-23, and just as of now.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, is there any way that I could see the same chart with like percentages? Thanks. And then maybe say survey feedback for retention strategy. Is that a specific survey? Or that's just general?
That's leveraging what is put into the exit survey.
Got it.
So
Okay.
why people are leaving.
I understand. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, move on to the budget amendment process.
Vicky's got her hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Board Member Vandermeulen?
Yes, just on quick question on the insurance slide. And that is, does that include the retirees or does not include the retirees?
Are you asking about slide 31?
Yes,
The retirees are included on there.
thank you. That's it.
All right, thank you.
Can I just want to make one point on slide 33, which is that even though we know Quartz and Dean, their rates are going up, there are no changes to the plan design or the employee contribution, and so I think that's just an important point to make. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, we're maintaining the tiers, we're maintaining the plan design for this year.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the budget amendment timeline. There's a Google form that's available for y'all to use. We talked about having that completed by May 20th in terms of any amendments that you have or would like to be considered at this point in the proposed budget timeline for the preliminary budget vote in June board meeting. So the plan would be, we would then notify the board member, the Board of Education of the amendments that have been submitted and received. By June 7th, the staff would then do a response and or any analysis necessary for the amendments received. And at the operations work group, we would present the amendments and then discuss and go decision regarding those, that would allow it and the preliminary budget. And then I want to also add, because this is a months-long process, right? I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to continue to do what we did last fall, right? That once the budget is approved in June, that becomes the preliminary budget. That's what we need by law to continue to operate as an organization until the state gives us our final numbers in the fall and fall approved budget. You remember we had a similar process to amend the budget at that time. So the budget can be amended as it's developed and as it's changing, and as we have a better sense of where our numbers are. But the timeline for the preliminary budget to be approved by the board in June is the timeline that's laid out here, right? I just want to share that clarity, which I did not include in and any other information to help how it's all tied together. Building, literally. Any questions about that?
Board member Vandermeulen, I see your hand.
Yep. Yes, my question is, I know, oh, I'm still muted?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, because my computer's still muted, sorry. My question is that, I didn't know we changed the board policy to fit it in size-wise into a Google form. I think budget amendments need to be as long as they need to be. To be able to amend a document of the people and to fit our values can't necessarily be fit into 200 characters of a Google form.
Nikki, we had this conversation this morning. I told you that I was gonna be reviewing and looking into that. I will be reviewing and looking into that and have an answer for you by tomorrow.
Thanks, TJ. You're always great at that. My other question on the amendments is that will we get a list of all the ones that have been proposed after and to decide whether or not they're going forward, or are we just going to introduce all of them like always? Just want to make sure what the rules are in advance.
Maybe go back to that timeline slide.
Yeah.
That's on May 24th. So on the timeline, it states on May 24th, board members will be notified of the list of all 25 amendments that have been received.
I appreciate it because, yeah, last year it was on the timeline sheet and then we kind of scrambled. So I just wanted to make sure everything was on there, and I really thank you for all your work on this. It's really important and I appreciate all the hard work.
No problem.
Thank you. Nothing further. Now I gotta figure out how to turn my hand.
Board member Simkin.
Yes, so, Bob, I just wanna sort of reiterate what I just heard you say, sure that we have shared understanding. So I know I was worried about getting amendments in on time because I'm gonna have a lot of questions, then have a lot of answers before I conclude. So what I'm hearing you say is that we have a legal requirement to have a preliminary budget beginning of June, June, and that we can continue to propose budget amendments after that date up until we're finalizing the budget. Is that correct?
Yes, the board will vote in the June for a preliminary budget, but the budget is gonna be evolving as the year goes on. And then the final vote for the budget for 24-25 will be at the October Board of Education.
Thank you for reassuring me that what I heard was right.
And then after that time, the board can continue to amend the budget. It just requires a 2/3 vote instead of after the approved budget in the fall. It can be amended anytime.
All right, to board policy, student fees.
Okay, we're gonna talk about, I believe, 4 different policies, right? We wanna start with, the existing policies that the board has, 3340 and 3710 first. And then take a look at, and take a look at the, recommendation in terms of the Neola format, and then Josh Perkins, our food service director, is here. He's going to talk about some new policies we're going to propose related to the USDA requirement to have certain items in our policy to clarify what is necessary. So the first one, I'll talk about we'll talk about our existing policies and the recommendations, and then I'll start out with the current policy of 3340. And so the recommendation is to adopt the Neola standard process for the waiver of school fees. We already have a pretty decent process that is first and foremost pretty consistent with the waiver policy in in our existing policy. We would continue consistent with current board policy. The fines, student fines for damage or lost items would continue not to be, they're not allowed to be waived under our current policy, nor would we recommend them to be to add the fines or monies owed that could be waived. So the rationale to adopt the format is that it becomes, the format in Neola is a much more consistent and more defined step-by-step process. The rationale that can be used to apply for that waiver, and under which principals would be allowed to waive that student fee. Under our current policy in Neola, principals would be the primary respondent to families that request a waiver. The denials of any waiver under the policy would appeal to the district administrator on Neola, just like it is under our current. We stop and look at the actual Neola language at this time, or go through it all.
We could pause for questions for this one before you go to the next. To allow them not have to try to hold us all.
Yes.
Can I get clarification? Which one are we supposed to be looking at?
3340.
I think the Neola.
Oh,
Yep, but this is not original.
Yeah.
The bigger,
So the Neola,
harder to read. I guess the one we're supposed to be referring. The one with the green.
Yeah, Neola is 6152.0.
Board Member Vandermeulen?
As much as Neola isn't always my favorite, this actually does streamline it a heck of a lot better than I thought it could be streamlined, but that is not exactly easy for late. So I'm okay with it.
Let's give it one more minute or so. Board Member Moser Feltham?
I can, if you wanna give it a minute for people to,
Okay.
that's fine.
All right, Board Member Moser Feltham?
I'll actually hold one more question until the fines portion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Proceed then.
Jesse next time.
Okay, current policy, board policy 3710 would be the OLA 6,000. Yes, 6,000. 6152. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Neola 6152. All right, so the recommended changes would be to establish the student fine structure, amounts, and MMSD procedures. And remove the student fine structure and amounts from board policy. First, that's the recommendation. The rationale would be the current structure of fines are detailed, and belief is much more efficient and effective for us to manage the fine structure through the procedure process versus board policy. The student fees, including rental fees and the food charges, continue to be established annually by the board when they approve the June preliminary. Would recommend in the fees, rentals, and fines to specify the current law option to collect unpaid fees and fines and rentals via the small claim process. This would be specifying the potential consequences for families that do not pay or have unpaid student fees, fines, and other charges. In addition, would specify the option to allow the department to contract with a third-party vendor to collect unpaid student fees or expenses, including food service, unpaid meal balances. Again, the same rationale being we would be more clearly specifying the potential consequences for unpaid student fees, fines, and other charges.
About 60, 70 seconds. All right, board member Vandermeer.
I know I stated in my briefing earlier, but I just wanted to state the only problem I have with it, although I know it's necessary, is I don't want to send anyone to collections over not being able to pay their kids' lunch. It just freaks me out. I understand it is an incredibly rare situation and almost happens almost never. But it's just something that I just can't feel comfortable with. And that's my only comment on it.
Board member Simpkin.
So I'm gonna reiterate what I said last time. I will not for that section in this policy to be included. So I would vote either not to pass the policy altogether or that section to be eliminated that refers to the district administrator or designee either taking the student or the student's parents to small claims court for collection or a contract party vendor to collect unpaid student fines, fees, or expenses, including food service unpaid expenses. I won't do it.
Thank you. Any other board member questions? Oh, board member Moser Felton.
I'm curious about, I was curious about this, in our instruction work group too, about the decision, our decision about which parts of the Neola policy template to use. So for example, in this one, the Neola policy has the board shall waive fees or fines assessed only for whose families are unable to afford them. But we've struck or fines. And I'm wondering what the thought process is for that. And I'm wondering too, for a student who was not assessed a fee because of the family's inability to pay the fee, who then loses their clarinet because they're a sixth grader. Sort of like what is the practical implication for that student who can be assessed a fee unless they fall under protection from Convento, but can't pay the fine, right, which is why they didn't have the fee to begin with. I'm just sort of curious about how we imagine this playing out. And why we have it this way. I don't know who I'm asking exactly.
Probably me, I'll respond first. So in terms of existing board policy, student fines for damaged or lost items are not allowed to be, right? So that should be consistent with existing policy. Right?
Yeah, I see that.
And so there's no more rationing.
That's what it was.
Yes.
So I guess I'm interested in, on a conversation on the board about if that's something that we wanna see shifted. The only reason is, that's how it used to be, or that's how the current policy is, that's what policy on this, and see change. I also, I understand from food service that, unpaid fees can be $200,000 a year. Do we have any sense of like what unpaid fines and fees are outside of food service? I would love to hear about that.
So, for 23, in total, our unpaid fines in terms of overdue was 103,000
In terms of overdue?
not paid.
Oh, okay, I see.
And in 24 to date, fiscal year 24, fines not paid, unpaid are 109,500.
Okay. Got it.
I would say just generally overall on the topic of fees and fine total. We have seen a significant jump since COVID of folks not paying fees and fines in terms of families. And 2021, our total uncollected was 37,700. The year before was 3,450. So in 21, it jumped to 37,700. 2022, it ended up being 26,700. And 23 is 172,700. And right now for fiscal year 24, we're projecting it to be $281,500. And on the topic of budget, right, these create budget holes. We budget costs based on the revenues, and this is a revenue stream. So any consideration of not collecting is totally understandable, but it comes with a budget hole, right? And we need to talk about how you, I mean, there's only two ways to fill a budget hole: cut the costs or get the revenues, right?
Do you have any sense of what of these budget holes are being incurred by families, who are unable to pay versus those who are choosing not to or forgetting, or that's not something that we can really say?
I mean, I don't think it's something we can really say, but I would say that the two overriding factors, I believe, in terms of operations is, any family that comes to the principal that says, I can't afford to pay, we have a fairly open and understanding policy where principals are allowed to waive the payment of the fees. So, and they do, right? They do waive fees. And then, the second point I would say is the belief is because of that fee waiver and because of staff at the schools knowing to encourage families to submit the free and reduced price lunch application for meals. The belief is, don't think we have any survey information, the belief is the families aren't paying are not eligible for a waiver and are not eligible for free and reduced price meals, right?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate all of that detail. Thanks.
Board Member Simpkin.
wondering, it feels like this might correspond when students started taking books back and forth from school. Is that, when did everybody get a Chromebook? Is that part of what we're looking at for this jump?
We started getting Chromebooks. And why did you ask that question? Knowing I wouldn't know that answer. So I started in 17.
Yeah.
And then they were already 3 years into the program when I started, so probably around the beginning of the tech plan. So about, I think it was 2014.
So I'm just curious, I guess, because now students are expected to take the work every day.
Grades 5, only from grades 5 through 12.
Okay. I'd be curious to know how much of this are lost or damaged.
Yeah. And especially the other thing that we did was, so library fines was another one that we hold with not incurring those fines for library books. So I know a lot of it is, a lot of Bob might be tech, because might be tech, instruments, might be where we're looking at. So maybe what we should do is kind of look and see where those fines are coming exactly from, what area included. And we started in 15, 16, the tech plan.
Oh. So I guess where my brain is going with this is having a better breakdown. What goes into those fines might help come up with some solutions that are maybe more effective than trying to take people to small things.
Board member Vandermeulen?
Yes, I also would like to know how the fines are assessed for individuals with special ed. I'd like to use myself as an example. In middle and high school, I went through 21 different locks that I managed to break, trying to figure out how to open them. In freshman year of college, one semester, I lost 37 keys, all related to disability. My question is this: how do we calculate what the value is when it is directly a manifestation of the individual's disability? Does it need to be in the IEP? Does there need to be a specific section in the plan stating that? Because it will have an unfair effect.
Nikki, I will say that might be something where that waiver comes into play. Also, a family certainly, work with a cross-categorical teacher to, make a recommendation on if that waiver should be filled out, given what example you just described from your own personal life, right? Some of these decisions, I think, happen between teacher and family or principal and family. Well, I don't see it specifically called out here in the policy, though.
I think it needs to be called out in the policy, because I also am thinking the pride issue. They're going to out individuals who may not want to admit to the principal whose wife they may bowl with, or the teacher whose husband they might have meetings with, that they're having financial issues and not able to pay. The pride issue is still an issue. And that confidentiality only goes so far. I worry. That's me. That's just a comment. I just worry.
Thank you. Board member Nichols?
Yes. Can I ask Board Member Simkin? Just for my own clarification, is the major issue here that the fines, if the fine collected, is it the small court piece of this? Or is it collecting fines and fees altogether?
I'm actually comfortable with the idea of students and families being accountable. to, fees that they've accrued as long as it doesn't put them in a position of getting in trouble if they can't. I don't think that public education should lead to anybody getting in trouble for not having enough money.
So the magnitude in 23 in terms of assigned fees, fines, right? It's $2.97 million. This year, we're estimating total fees of 2.9, right, in total.
Of all fees?
Of all
Is
fees,
that,
Bob?
is that what I?
Yes,
Food service.
fees, fine, not food service.
Oh,
Food services alone and by themselves. All other student fees, fines, and rentals. 23, $2.97 million were assigned to be collected. And in 24, the total was more than that this year, 2.91 million.
And so Bob, you're saying like even in our budget book, we have a whole fees table.
Right.
Right? So you're talking about like,
Oh,
we're looking at all students who are enrolled in
Not-
art, in drawing, and all the things where we would collect fees. And you have that from course enrollment. And you, or whatever, I don't know exactly how you do it, but you have some projection of saying these are all the fees we collect based on what students are signing up for.
Mhm.
And including athletics. Okay, and so you're saying that revenue of collecting fees for all the offerings that we have across the district was put in the budget at 2.97 million,
except for food service.
except for food services.
Yes.
And then you're saying we've collected 2.91 or no? Did I,
No, assigned to be collected just under 3 million both years. So another way of saying, if we wanted to eliminate all fees and fines and rentals and all that stuff, it costs $3 million of general fund revenues, or we'd have to cut 3 million in expenses, so that the revenue support.
okay. But I wasn't, I don't think I was hearing it as like eliminate all fees.
No, I'm just saying what that 3 million means.
Okay,
Yeah, so that's not where I'm going tonight. I think the first meeting, I was leading up to that, but right now I just want to be pragmatic and talk about this particular.
it's the unpaid part and kind of how do you collect if you're going to collect. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and it's pretty consistent in terms of the dollar amounts of that $3 million. What was exempted or voided or waived was 1.3 million last year. This year, we're running short of just over 1.2 million, right? So when you're talking about how many are waived or exempted, close to half of what we would be assigned to collect.
Mhm. Yeah, and can you remind me again, so of like, let's say the $103,000 last year were unpaid. Do we track how much of that we actually collect? Or do we just kind of sit uncollected?
So there's a couple of different reports. We collect by fee, what we believe we should be getting, what was voided or exempted, and what was collected, paid, and what was not collected by the revenue stream or specificity of it.
Okay.
Board Member Muldrow?
So if you have 100,000 that's unpaid and 2,900,000 that is paid, that would mean that 97% of people who are charged fees pay their fees.
In 23, the unpaid balance was 221,000, and in 24, we believe it's gonna be closer to 290,000.
So that would be about 5% of people struggle to pay fees.
I wouldn't associate with people, I would associate the percentage of fees collected, right? 200,000, 3 billion, you mean, that way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think it's relevant to consider that the vast majority of our families who are not qualifying for a waiver are paying fees. I think taking into consideration, given the size of our budget, that $200,000 is something we could use fund balance to pay down. It's also something fundraise. I think that there's a variety of kind of options related to these fees. I guess I was curious because we talked about this last time. There's a decent number of families who donate additional money to go on a field trip or donate additional money so that a kiddo can get an instrument. How do we factor that into this equation?
I would suspect that the school secretaries are gonna be coding it as revenues received and would be showing up as revenues collected. Would be happening, it happen every time. Should be.
But so if you code it as revenues collected, you don't necessarily say, we asked for $20 for this fee, the parents gave us 40, this is the $20 that goes towards another child's ability to participate. There's nothing, no way that we keep track of, like, this is what parents have given beyond their fee in order to support a student who struggles to pay their fee.
Right, I'd assume it would be collected and booked as revenue for X, whatever the parent donated it for.
Okay.
I don't know, if the school secretary say, we have a list, and these are the families that didn't pay and they matched it off as it, and I don't know how each secretary or.
Yeah, I think I'm more interested in how that factors in, like, holistically in terms of like what all do we connect that's donating to cover another student's fee. I do have some curiosity if we could receive those resources from the greater community when families are really struggling, and how we as a district communicate that to our community, especially given that the vast majority of families who are not qualifying for waivers are paying their fees.
I just also want to make sure like we're kind of talking about the number of different things when we're talking about fees, rental fees, and fines. Field trip fees, like I think that our whole concept of what fees is a very broad term. Because you have like fees that, hey, when you, like I always think about Cindy, who always say, when I enrolled my kid, I had my student, there were some fees attached there. Then there are like fees for like different trips. And then you think about there also when we're thinking about fines. So just kind of thinking about exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about fees and not getting it mixed up with fines.
I guess I would say I'm comfortable voting for the policy, given kind of my current understanding. I appreciate not having the language about taking families to small claims court. So I greatly appreciate that you raised that. I think that I'd prefer the policy not include that language specifically. That's it for me.
Anyone else?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So just wondering then, when we think about removing that language of not and I don't know what the number is for how many families we actually already are using small. I don't know what that number looks like.
I think none.
Right? But I would be interested to wonder then what then would be, when Laura say, I'm okay with us having a sense of accountability, what are board members thinking are some ways for us to really be able to really have that thing of accountability? If what we're saying right now, we want to remove that, what then are some avenues of place to replace that small claims court?
I think that's an area for me personally where I would appreciate the opportunity to explore what our options look like as a public entity. So I don't know if beyond taking people to small claims court, if we have the ability to say, hey, if you don't pay this fee within this amount of time, there is, you know, an additional late fee. I don't know what our process is to incentivize paying if we don't want to engage in kind of small claims and collections for families. So if that's the only option we have as a district, I think we need to be explicit in saying that. If we have other or more creative solutions to that, I would be interested in exploring them.
So I would just use myself, for example, of thinking about when we initiated, I think around tech, and I just wanna I only can talk from the standpoint of like the technology piece. We do already are working with family members to try to think about, yes, you have a fine, but then, you know, principals are working with them in order to find creative ways to work those fines, or like in lieu of those fines, you can do X, Y, and Z on the school campus. But I just want to think about then what happens though when if we remove that, what happens when there's nothing else.
I think the interesting about that as a that idea as a hypothetical is that right now, if the vast majority of families, if 90% or more families are paying their fees, I guess, is there a worry that less families will continue to pay their fees if we don't name a specific recourse related to not paying?
So if I can respond, I know I've got this like really utopian viewpoint of this, but that's where I'm at. So that's what I'm gonna share. I think that people have a sense of personal responsibility and pride in paying their bills. I don't actually pay my bills so that I don't get in trouble. I pay my bills because I owe the money and it's the right thing to do. And so the idea of having to have a punitive like conclusion to the process, I actually don't believe that's necessary. I think that the vast majority of families want to support school. They do the best that they can to do that. And they recognize that if they're not paying their bills, there's a consequence for their student's school. That's what I said.
Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, can you come back to me in 1 second? I'm trying to remember what I was gonna say. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think we have a few more slides left from Josh on USDA requirements, so push through on that and take all questions after that.
Thank you.
And in some of these, I'll touch on some of the themes that have been discussed so far. This slide is simple. It just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of a requirement that we have from DPI. This requirement has been fulfilled. The requirement is that we have an unpaid meal charge policy. So what I owed to DPI as the Director of Food Nutrition was to provide a timeline of when the policy will be completed. And we had to meet a deadline. It's passed, and we submitted notice to DPI that this policy is before the board now. That we're unable to say a specific date on which it will be voted, but the action has been satisfied. This is straight from the language in the corrective action plan. The first paragraph you have here is a direct quote, so that everybody can simply know what DPI requires. We do not currently have a policy which formalizes and governs how we handle unpaid meal charges, which is what we've been talking about. And I just wanted to get basically an update. At this point, DPI has notification from us that there's a policy before the board, and at such time as a policy is adopted and ratified, I'll notify them of that too. We can go to the next slide, please. These are just some things that we have practiced, albeit not having a specific policy, and which I think are commendable and we should continue. We discussed a little bit of this, the last operations work group too. We continue to feed students nutritious meals during the school day, regardless of their negative balance. We have a practice now, if not enshrined in policy, that we do not withhold food from students because of negative balance. I believe we should continue this in the policy we adopt. We protect the integrity and health of Fund 50 by limiting snack or a la carte sales when a negative balance is incurred, which simply means that although we continue to serve USDA meals, you say, oh, I also want to put some chips and a beverage on the district's tab. We say, no, sorry, we do serve a USDA meal, but we draw the line at saying you're going to continue to accrue debt on the district's books with those optional purchases. I think that makes sense and still is in keeping with the dignity of serving whole meals. And the last part is, it's not a tough reach for us. We're going to continue to participate in the farm to school programs. We have actively done so, and we should continue to do so. That's also in the policy draft. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about, there was, the point was raised just a few moments ago. What is the concern if we do not have a specific backstop or method by which we say, now that we have finished collecting donations, or we have come to the limits of the donations that we collect from the community, now that we have asked, we've reminded, we've said, this is really an important thing to make whole to the district. Is there a concern that these fees will continue to go unpaid? I have that concern. And that's because in the 2 years that I've been in the seat as director, we have seen historically high levels of unpaid meal debt, which are a debit to Fund 50. We have sustained unpaid meal debts and absorbed them in the past at MMSD, but not at this level, which is in excess of $200,000 a year. The operational capacity that represents, or the depletion of that operational capacity, is considerable. I thought the speaker we heard from earlier, David O'Keefe, represented it well. That $200,000 could be returned to the community in ways that would be tangible and enjoyed by all students, but instead is just a depletion to Fund 50's capacity, which is a self-sustaining fund. It operates on its own. So I think I wanted to express that, yes, I do think, and I have seen as the director of the program for the last 2 years, there is an active donations process. There is an active process of communication with families in the district who have outstanding fees, year long, throughout the year, continual reminders and solicitations. Here's how you apply for the process. If you're having difficulty, we're going to take your applications for meal benefits in a multitude of ways, different formats. And after all of those efforts, we are still left with in excess of $200,000 a year, 2 years running. So I am concerned that this will continue at this level. This is not a local problem. This is not a local phenomenon. It has been acknowledged as a nationwide phenomenon. And that is why I think a number of states have decided to go with universal meals, which is alluded to earlier in the conversation as well. The last time we discussed this, I thought that the way that I remember Bob articulating the choice to say, if you levy fees, you should intend to collect them as a way to return operating benefits to your community. And if you do not intend to collect, or do not feel that you want to put the machinery in place to collect in sincere good faith, the question then becomes, should you have the fees to begin with? And this is the question, I think, which faces us in terms of meal fees in this community, because we are seeing this historically high level of debt, which comes out of Fund 50 and which could otherwise be returned back to the community. My example here is actually the same as the speaker earlier referred to Nuestro, and you could transition several more schools to scratch cooking, which I do believe actually is a good strategy for us to continue to build interest in the program, which is a fiscal benefit that Fund 50 and the district ultimately. Next slide, please. So the policies, these are specific food service policies. There are 2 of them, and they do tie in strongly to what we've been discussing already. 8,500, the rationale, we do need to meet a DPI requirement at some point. We do need to create a fiscal management structure. That is the explicit charge from DPI. And the rationale is simply to maintain the integrity of Fund 50. If we do decide to continue to charge fees to those who fall outside eligibility for federal assistance for meal benefits, we should collect those fees so that we can continue to operate at maximum community benefit. That's how I see this. The collection of those fees allows us to return that back to the community. I'm sorry, if you go to the next slide. The next slide is a much shorter policy, and it simply formalizes our commitment to diligent notification of the process to families by which they can apply for meal benefits. And it strengthens our policy, via policy, our commitment to seek out all available funding sources with which to benefit our meal programs. We do that now. It is our current practice, but it enshrines it in this policy. So that is the end of my slides.
Thank you, Josh.
Of course.
Appreciate you.
Outstanding questions, Board Member Vandermeul and then Board Member Pearson.
Yes. Okay, this is gonna sound harsh, but this is where I'm at. I don't believe this policy should exist. Period. Right now, we have children who,
Which one? Sorry.
I apologize, I wasn't on the having to pay on the fund, on the, if you could not afford lunch, you will get a USDA meal. How do we know what an extra is? We had someone already state their daughter was denied a thing of milk because, and that was at the last meeting, the last general board meeting. My question here is this. We have people who may not tell what their debt is. There is no way we can be able to restrict it in a manner that isn't going to have a kid stand there to determine whether or not they can afford their lunch. They'll just stop eating it. It just baffles me on that because the majority do pay. As for giving back to the community, I cannot grasp that we can, I'm going to regret saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Every 4 years, we can afford to go to referendum, but we can't afford to feed our kids. And that's basically, we're allowed to ask the money, but we can take the parents to small claims court for not paying it. Because that's the policy we're basically setting. And it's just disturbing to me. I don't mean anything rude or disrespectful. I just find it disturbing in nationwide, not just us, in the nation.
Thank you. I don't feel disrespected. I do want to point out the question of milk. It's a legal requirement. We can either make a decision to fund something like milk as a standalone item, or which we have to find a funding source for. We are not allowed to give them away outside of a USDA meal and absorb that from Fund 50. That's not legal for us to do. And that's the genesis of that part of the policy.
Got it.
Regarding, and thank you for bringing it up. It is a very specific circumstance, but some foods are classified. It's a pretty bright line. What goes into a USDA meal, and then outside of that service, what counts as an item that you must have a way to govern fiscally. And to the second point, it may indeed be possible that we can afford to feed all of the families in the district who do not have, that choice could be made. Currently, we have a structure where, as has been pointed out, there are a group of families who are outside of federal assistance eligibility. They're not eligible for those benefits, and we're paying for some of them, but not all of them. And that's what I mean when I say And that's not because of a policy that we have.
Don't
It's
be shy.
because we have been absorbing those high levels of debt, and then we don't have a choice except to absorb them. I would suggest we take an avenue of either finding a way to collect those debts and return them to the community in an equitable fashion, or fund all school meal fees in a similarly equitable fashion.
I appreciate all your help. Thank you. And
Of course.
again, I mean no offense. I know my language can be striked.
Not at all.
All right, Board Member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. I remembered my question, sorry, from the last slide. So sorry if we're going back a little bit. If we were to take families to small claims courts, how much would it cost for us to do that?
I don't know that answer that question. I guess
Okay.
how many we would take.
I mean, I just asked that question. Go ahead, sorry.
No. Go ahead, Maya. I don't have any.
Oh, no, it's all right. No, I was just asking that question because if it costs more for us to do that piece, then to actually get the debts collected, even if we were to contract out to a debt collection agency, like how much would it cost us to collect it? And if it's more than what we would actually get returned back, to me, that just seems like there's no point in doing it. And so that's why I just asked that. And then also, TJ's point of like, what would be the alternative? I guess that's something for us to think about as well. In terms of like the school lunches, I would love to figure out how we are able to do that and set precedents in our state and move forward if we could give lunches to all children. And then, yeah, so that's kind of like where I am about that. But I understand what you were saying earlier, Josh. So thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Mosner Feltham.
Thanks. To give the room a sense of where I'm at, I feel like there's a really big space between like not making any good faith effort to collect funds and like small claims court or collections. And I haven't actually heard anything about like what's happening in that space. And to use me and my family and my kids' lunch account as like an example, when we first started talking about this maybe a month ago, I was like, oh yeah, I haven't like paid my kids' lunch funds in a while. And I go in and like, you know, I can only pay $100 at a time. So I have to go in like a couple times in a row to pay their lunch fees, which I can afford and want to pay. But like I didn't verify my email. So I didn't get any indication, like any email saying like, hey, your kid's like $400 in lunch debt. And so that makes me curious about like what we're doing in the space between small claims court or collections and like nothing. And for me, I would like to hear either more about what we're doing in that space before I would be comfortable saying like, yeah, let's go to collections with this stuff, or not have that in the policy right now. As we learn more about sort of like what it takes to collect these and why people aren't paying and that kind of thing. So that's where I'm at with this. And then my question is, can you please define SFA?
School Food Authority.
Got it, thanks.
Yep. Just comment briefly on your question. We have a variety of things. We have some pretty formulaic ways of communicating with families via email, also by a phone call, also by a paper mail. I do appreciate that some of the administrative steps you have to take, you know, it's similar to any online payment system, and yes, you have to keep your email up to date, and it is probably burdensome at some points, inconvenient. I think I feel comfortable saying we really want to collect these monies because there are a lot of projects I'm excited about in the department, and that's what they would go for. That's why I wanted to mention, you know, at the beginning, especially at the beginning of the first year I was in the district, which followed the lapse of essentially what we're looking at is there was an entitlement program, a very broad-based entitlement program, which was extended by the federal government for 2 years and then withdrew. And that is the situation that we all faced in school food, certainly faced it. Hey, we needed families to realize, got to get back on the wagon, file the applications. That was a very difficult corner to turn. Many hours on the phone saying, do you know about the process? Do you know how to do this? That's why I wanted to mention after all of those efforts, and we tried to evolve the frequency, the medium we were using to communicate. After all of those, we're still seeing the net result is these.
Right. I guess the thing is like, and I know this is my experience and I'm a person with 2 children. But like, the issue wasn't that I was eligible for free and reduced lunch and didn't apply, right? It was this totally other thing. And I don't, I appreciate all the numbers about like how much money this is costing, but I don't, and I think someone asked like, what's the breakdown of tech versus library fines and stuff. And so maybe we'll hear about that in a weekly update, but like, I don't feel confident that we have or maybe you do, right? You said this is a national issue and it's been reported on. Why? But like, it doesn't yet feel clear to me to understand like why these entities, and without understanding like why, I feel uncomfortable being like, this is what we should do about it. So that's just where I'm at. And I would welcome more conversation in briefing. Like
Sure. Board Member Nichols, then Board Member Muldrow.
Oh, yeah. So I think what I'm hearing from tonight's conversation is we have 2 policies tonight. 3710. No, I'm sorry. 6152. I don't know why I wrote 3710. 6152, the student fees, fines and charges that has some reference to how debt would be collected. And then we have this other policy, the 8500. Which also has a reference to bad debt.
Yep.
There's lots of conversations about the bad debt piece of these 2 policies. These are supposed to come back in a week. So what I'm wondering is specific to your DPI corrective action, where they've already asked you for a timeline on when this policy will be established. Did you indicate to DPI that this was scheduled for a vote in May or was it more like in the near future? Because I guess what I'm wondering is based on this conversation, if it can even come next week or if it needs to be moved to like the June the June board meeting, and if that's allowable, because yours seems super time sensitive. Yeah, so I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, the update I gave to DPI does say it's before the board in May, but we are not, part of the action is not saying, I know that the policy will be passed at a certain date. We have to show that.
You had to show that it was moving forward.
2 things. We have to acknowledge that, yes, we understand the ramifications of not having a policy, and we know that we have to provide a timeline for getting one in place. We have to have one.
Yeah.
A policy. We don't currently. So
Does it need, is there any specification in the finding around the language about unpaid debt and the steps the district's taking? I'm talking specifically about, okay.
No.
Yeah, you know exactly what I was asking.
Absolutely.
Got it. Yep.
It is, the requirement is only to pass a policy.
Got it.
You're not currently covered.
Okay, great. And then,
Oh, no, please.
and then for this other policy, I don't know if this is to Bob or you, but the 6152, the student fees, fines and charges. This was on the list of policies that the board, we had talked about, kind of like policies that needed to be updated this school year. So is there an implication if this one policy waits until June? I don't know with it coming in a week with the additional I just don't know if we need more information to make an informed policy vote, or if we just bring it next week and then. So I don't know what the implications are.
So I just wanted, so, Bob, 3710, I know that that was the one.
Oh, yeah.
3710 is our current, so that's. what I'm
Yes,
just
okay,
saying.
I knew I had 3710 on here.
So
Okay.
if 3710 was not to be voted on in May, but it was to be voted on in June, at the June meeting instead,
That's what I'm proposing, because
Yeah.
I'm assuming we needed to
is,
get
is
this
there any
policy
negative
updated this year.
implication on that, or can it wait for the June?
I think you can wait for the June meeting.
Yeah, and I'm not proposing anything, I'm just hearing that it feels like there's the conversation around the bad debt piece is what's resonating with folks.
I think that it's permissible for another reason, because it wasn't going to go on effect until July 1.
Okay,
So we, either way, even if you had voted on this next Monday, it wasn't going to be effective immediately. So that speaks to having a little more time.
so I think my wondering, and I'm sorry, Sabian, I guess what I'm wondering is for the student fees, fines and charges, particularly around the bad, the debt and the debt collection piece of it, is there specific information that we want to come back in order to like maybe do a policy pass on this again? Is it like looking at some alternative? There was a lot where I felt like kind of in the conversation about how much do we understand about what's comprising the unpaid fees and fines? What additional solutions might we think of instead of small claims court? So I'm just trying to think if there's specific information that we're requesting to come back to this policy.
And if that could, and just wondering, just, Michelle, thank you for that, but just also thinking about where we are with policy to come forth in June. So far, just so we're, just for the operation, space, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 policies that's supposed to come through in June. So just wondering whatever those updates are, if those updates need to be brought forth in June operation, or is it like be a weekly update of some sort, or a board briefing that we can provide them to you, or if that is only, it can only happen in June? So I just want to be mindful of what's coming through for June for operation already. There are a couple of number of policies.
Board Member Muldrow?
So similarly to my question about fees and fines, I'm curious about what percentage of our families, one, qualify for free or reduced lunch. So what percentage of families does the conversation we're having right now almost kind of not apply to, because they don't pay these fees? So about 50% of our district qualifies for free or reduced lunch. I think that's a really important thing to kind of wrap our heads around in terms of economic reality of the families that we serve. Of the 50% who can afford to pay lunch per standards created by the federal government, what percentage of those families are up to date in terms of paying for school lunch?
Great question. I can make that calculation for you. I've been looking at it more in terms of the number of families who carry debts with us.
Okay, I'm just curious what percentage of the families that carry debt with us, if that is significant in comparison to the folks who realize they're a little bit behind and go on and pay it off, and that sort of dynamic in our district. The other question I have is, for the most part, when people sell food, they want to make a profit on food. I would imagine that we're set up slightly differently than that. But in terms of like the cost analysis of the food we serve, how much of what we charge for food is just what that food costs and what it costs for us to serve that food? And is there any profit related to the cost of what people pay for a meal for the school?
We are, I think it's safe as a blank statement to say we are not realizing a profit from those sales. I think this follows the theme, without getting too much in analytics that I can't confidently volunteer. The theme that Bob has articulated in terms of the unfavorable axes of revenues or reimbursements to expenditures is applying to Fund 50 as well.
Okay.
Federal reimbursements came up during the pandemic, came back down as part of the withdrawal of the entitlement program. All other costs have been going up, labor. A lot of districts, again, this is not a local issue, this is a national issue. But we do not realize a profit on those meals. We have seen expanding expenditures, declining revenues. Part of that is commendable pay increases that we gave to staff. Some of them are, we've talked at length tonight about increasing revenues for fringe programs, health benefits, going up precipitously. That all goes into amortizing the cost of producing those. But I think, to address that same point, that the question of how many families are paying in good faith versus families who do carry debts with the district. My aim is to come up with the most equitable possible practice so that I, as the director of and the administrator of these funds, am not at risk of essentially saying to the community, I am going to decide that it's okay for some people to pay and not for other people to pay. Currently, our practice reflects that reality. We have some people we have that swath of people who need to pay according to federal means testing, which is how we're currently operating the program. And many do, and some don't. And I would like us all to come to consensus on how to be as equitable as possible so that somebody who is paying their debts doesn't feel as though they're being treated unfairly.
I completely respect what you're saying. I think the reason I'm asking these questions is because food exists differently than a lot of other opportunities in the district. So we do have the ability to adjust the price of the food we serve, or do we not have the ability to adjust the price of the food we serve?
We have the ability to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting leverage point that doesn't exist in most other areas of the district in terms of how we charge people. I am curious if we could resolve this issue in a variety of creative ways, including, how much it costs. If you're a family who can afford to buy your kid a meal, how much does it cost to buy a meal every single day of the whole school year? And we ask parents for that upfront at the beginning of the year. What are our options in terms of the collection of that fee and building in systems so that, somebody who wants to make sure that they're covering that cost is doing it upfront before they get behind. I do think looking at the percentage of folks who can pay and do pay in comparison to the folks who can pay and do not pay, I think is an interesting factor in how we think about this problem and how we think about solving it. I think the last thing I would say is that I think families, because we had free food for 2 years, I think there's a lot of families who really just kind of got used to that. And I think getting into a space of reorienting people that you have to qualify for free or reduced lunch, and this is what the fee structure looks like if you do not, could be a useful tool at this point and where people are. I also think you have to acknowledge that inflation hurts people in a lot of ways, and so I think we see more families in the coming years really struggling in ways that we hadn't seen prior to the pandemic and prior to the inflation rate hitting kind of this all-time high since the Great Depression. And so I think there are enough contributing factors that it makes sense to have a pretty clear-eyed analysis of what this means. And at the same time, I think it's okay for us to have a policy on collecting the costs of folks' food. And so that's kind of where I stand at this point. If we could talk through solutions in terms of debt collection that don't include sending folks to small claims court or, kind of penalizing families in ways that can really set folks back significantly and don't actually necessarily mean that people are better able to pay. I would be open to having that conversation as soon as possible. That's it for me.
Okay, board member Vandermeulen, and then I'll wrap up.
Yes, what I'd like to see is how much it would cost to take all of these families to small claims court. As well as alternatives on collecting these fees and additional possible language for special ed students. Because I think it needs to be in there, because I'm sorry, but not necessarily on the food one, but on the property one is what I mean. I wasn't clear on that, so I apologize. Otherwise, I'm good. Thank you for your work.
The last two comments. I will make our long-term, I would like I think that there's movement, support from us as a body, from folks in schools, families, the larger Madison city area to move towards universal school meals. That is a long-term project, and so in the meantime, we have to contend with this reality, and yes, we inch closer to having like legally to pass a policy. Really thinking about that space in between a third party debt person, like payment plans, something like that, to help out families where they are. So thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. All right, and with that, may I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
I wasn't clear on what we're doing with this as far as next steps. Cause I wanna make sure like I am providing you what you need. Coming in, so is it the flavor of the board that we are pausing on 3710? These two from food service that are coming from Josh, we're providing them and holding them until June. I have a number of different asks of percentage of families that qualify for free reduced lunch, percentage of families that carry debt. I put on here to look and see those who are free reduced lunch and those who are not. Looking to see what is, if we have a profit from our food sales, what is the cost of small claims court, and then just the whole option of moving to universal school meals. That is what I'm asking for, a follow-up from board members. Is it fine for a weekly update? Cause I just wanna make sure that I'm providing you what you need.
Yeah, I think a weekly update is cool. I think board members have made requests for information. Hopefully those have been documented. And I think we want to extend this into June as we met out kind of how we deal with this.
Bob, is that okay for you in terms of what you need for preliminary budget approval? What do you need?
The only, couple of questions were raised. The only issue that we would need to answer is if we wish to change the fee amounts, because they must be adopted at the budget. So the fees are a schedule in the preliminary budget. And so if we're talking about increasing food prices or any other activity or decrease, we set the fee per board policy in the budget. And so now, none of the policies are being, that is, the fee amounts are not being changed or recommended change. Policies can come at the same time, but any adjustments to the fee itself would have to be part of the schedule.
I see.
Budget.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I will update this document, put it in a weekly update, just so board members will know where we are with board. I will make sure like this getting a weekly update, just so we are all on one page on this one document.
All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. May I please get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. 7-0.